Nom Nom delivers fresh food with whole ingredients backed by veterinarian science. Science tells us that a dog's health starts in the bowl, so improving their diet is one of the best ways to help them live a long and happy life. Nom Nom's food is full of proteins your dog loves and the vitamins and nutrients they need to thrive. All you have to do is order, pour, and serve. Ready to make the switch to fresh? Order Nom Nom today. Go to https://trynom.com/curveball and get 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's https://trynom.com/curveball. Plus, Nom Nom comes with a money-back guarantee. If your dog's tail isn't wagging within 30 days, Nom Nom will refund your first order. No fillers, no nonsense, just Nom Nom. Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, we're going to be talking about stroke surviving. I am joined by Jo Ann Glim. Jo Ann is a 5-star author. Her mom passed away from a stroke when she was 14, and 24 years ago, she suffered a stroke. So we're going to be talking to her about how she faced dark times in her life, but she turned the darkness to light. Jo Ann, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for asking me.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Oh my goodness. You know, when you're 77 years old, there's a lot to tell. But I won't take you through that long journey, that's for sure. I was married for 47 years. My husband just passed away recently, and that's been a very deep grief. Other than that, we had an amazing relationship. And I'm sure the reason that he popped up first in the conversation is because he was my caregiver as I endured the stroke that I had. I guess the first place to start would be to let you know that it was a hemorrhagic stroke, which means that there was a weakened vessel, and it ruptured, and most people that have that type of a stroke end up dying. Out of 4 people, 1 will die immediately, 1 will die a few days later, 1 will be severely disabled, and 1 will live, but there's no guarantee for recovery. I was very, very blessed, even though I had been paralyzed for about 2 months. The area of my brain that was affected was the thalamus, and which is very deep within the brain. And so there was no way that they could do any kind of surgery. I had to just tough it out, and I either lived or I died. And after spending quite a bit of time being paralyzed, I truly was blessed back to full health.
Well, you lost your mom at the age of 14, also due to a stroke. Just kind of tell us about that and how you managed to bounce back from that.
That took almost a lifetime. When you lose your parent that early in your life, and I was the only child on top of it, so my father wasn't there. My grandparents were elderly. I was taken back to my mother's sister and her husband to live with them and finish out high school. But there really was no one, especially back in the 50s. You didn't talk about emotions. You didn't share what was truly happening in your life. And so you just kind of had to sort it out on your own. Now, my mother, God love her, she was a great lady. She didn't drink, but she smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, Lucky Strikes. And back then, and most people thought that cigarettes were healthy, that they helped you to relax and calmed your nerves and stuff, and she bought into that. So she was overweight, and she was only 51 years old when she passed away from a stroke. So that haunted me for a long time, because I was 14 and a sassy teenager on top of it. I thought I killed her. I thought it was the way I had behaved. And so I made it a point that I would never sass anybody back ever again in my life. And lived up to that too. I just didn't do it. But it wasn't until I was 28 that I figured out that maybe it was her lifestyle that had something to do with her health issues. And then when I was 52 and endured a stroke myself, it dawned on me that maybe this was something familial. The doctors told me, because I told them about this, and they told me that because I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I exercised, I ate healthy, that's probably what saved me.
Well, let's talk about your stroke. When you were paralyzed, what were the biggest things that people did to help you? And how did you stay positive during that time? Probably not knowing if you'd ever regain that movement again.
Well, first off, I wasn't positive right in the beginning. You're in such a state of shock because your body betrayed you. We all believe that if we put our minds to anything, our body will see us through. We just have to think hard enough. We can do anything, go anywhere, and that's really not true. We can make plans, but life is going to interrupt them at one time or another. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to face that. And we do have choices that we can make. But when you're enduring a stroke and you're coming back from it, there's a long grieving process because of this betrayal. And when you realize that there are certain things that you may never do again, you have to learn to let go. You have to learn to say goodbye to these things. We can fight to try to get them back. And you may regain it to a point, you may get it all the way back. That doesn't happen very often. But the thing is that if we choose to take that path, then we're taking away from ourselves to find a new position in life. And I was talking to somebody a few days ago about this. And the way I look at it is all through our lives, we make that kind of a decision. You know, maybe 20 years ago, we were really good at tennis. And then we got to a point that maybe we didn't enjoy it that much, or we found that we enjoyed coaching more than we did playing. And so our thought process changed a little bit and took us in a different direction. And that happens all through your life. So if you find yourself fighting to get back what you had at the time of the stroke, you may be chasing something that you would have lost or lost interest in a few years anyway. So why not spend that time trying to get back as much as you possibly can and get as strong as you can, and then use it to make your life as close to a normal life, whatever normal is, so that you can become a part of the community again. Not just as somebody that's there in the community, but somebody who's productive and someone who has a lot of value. Even if your stroke takes you down a path where the only thing you have left is your own thoughts, and all you can do is to pray for others. What a beautiful thing to be able to do, because trust me, we all need prayers.
What are the three biggest things that stroke survivors struggle with the most?
I think the feeling of loss, the feeling of loneliness, because a lot of times people don't know how to approach you. You look different, you talk different, you may even think differently. And that's one of the pluses that I think a lot of stroke survivors find, is you are no longer interested in being a part of the petty that happens around you. After almost losing your life and finding that you have an opportunity to regain life again, you don't want to waste 1 minute of it. And I know I only gave you two. I'm still thinking about the third one.
No, that's fine. Let's talk about technology. What's new as far as research and stuff that medical professionals have come up with to help stroke survivors now?
Oh my gosh. There is so much on the horizon that is just phenomenal. There's something they've been working on recently in the last few years called neuroplasticity. And what that means is that your mind has the ability to heal itself. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of commitment. And you need to be ready to work like an Olympian, because repetition is one of the things that helps the most, especially in neuroplasticity. I've seen pictures of people. There's one woman in particular who's a friend of mine who's also an author. She was a top model, international model for a number of years. Her name is Linda Rodstadt, and she wrote a book called Stroke Rebel. Well, this woman is brilliant, and she suffered 2 strokes within about 6 weeks period of time that just left her just totally devastated, and she wasn't about to accept that. And she read everything she could find, taught and researched as much as she possibly could, and went from being in a bed where she could do nothing, suffering with aphasia, which means she wasn't able to speak, to someone who just last year was out on the ski slopes in the Alps. So we always tell people who've had a stroke and are in a situation like that, don't ever give up. You can do this.
Speaking of aphasia, if your loved one or somebody that you're caring for is a stroke survivor and suffers from aphasia, how can you communicate with them if they can't talk?
It's funny that you should ask that question of all the questions. There's another friend of mine, her and her husband. I've just met them probably in the last 6 months. She was also an international model. And when she was 20 years old, she suffered a stroke in the, I believe it was the basal ganglia. But anyway, this stroke took everything away from her. It left her with something called locked-in syndrome, which means that she's not capable of moving from the neck down. And she's also aphasia. She can smile. She's got the most beautiful smile you ever saw. And as her husband explains, she's perfect as far as her body goes. She's perfect as far as her mind goes. But where the stroke occurred, it took away her ability for her mind to communicate with her body. But she has done amazing things in her life. And she and her husband communicate by, it's almost like a sign language, because she speaks using her eyes. She has learned how to put together an alphabet depending on where she places her eyes. And so her husband can read, and they use kind of a shorthand way of doing it. But she can get her words across to you very, very well. Now, for others who have aphasia and do not have what Kadi van der Hoeven has, they can still move, but they just can't communicate. There are computers and computer programs that they can use that will help them to talk with other people. So there are things out there, and if you're very expressive, just looking at someone, you can get your messages across that way as well.
When you had your stroke, you went to live in a rehab facility, then you transitioned back home. What was the hardest thing in that transitional period for you?
I think one of the hardest times I had, because I worked like an Olympian. I had the mindset that I would have to do everything to regain something. And I never let a moment go by. I mean, even after I got out of speech therapy, I would always ask for homework, and she would give me things to take back to my room. I wasn't able to write, but I tried. And my husband was able to read what I wrote. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And I think the hardest time for me was when they were trying to prepare me that I may be spending the rest of my life in a wheelchair. And they had set it up for me to have a discussion with this doctor about it. And I was so proud of myself because I had just gotten to a point where I could wheel myself. It wasn't pretty. It took 2 legs and 1.5 arms to make it down the hallway. And it might take me half an hour where it should have taken only minutes, but I did it on my own. And so I got down to the room and we were talking. And he told me that I may never be the same again, but I was still me. And that phrase just lit a fire in me, because I told him, I said, don't you ever tell me that I'm still me. I can't do the things I used to do. Every accolade that I ever got in my life is just a piece of paper and can be thrown to the wind. So don't tell me I'm still me. And that was the hardest thing for me to come to terms with was to be told that I was still me. And I still don't accept that.
For stroke survivors who insurance might run out, but they still need additional help, how do they go about getting that additional help with no insurance?
That's a good question. And we all struggle with that, whether we have insurance or not. In fact, I was just talking to someone today about that subject, because as stroke survivors, there's many of us that are within the communities on Facebook, in their groups, and we talk back and forth with each other, and we have a fairly large community, and there's things that are happening within that community so that our voice, whether we're aphasic or not, is going to be heard as far as what our needs are. One of the things is, and most of us agree with that, because therapy, whether it's physical therapy or speech therapy, any of the therapies are usually terminated way too soon. They've told us that we usually regain what we're going to within the first 6 months to a year, and then we can just forget about it. And that's not true. I've talked to many people who have regained things 2 years later, 4 years later, even 10 years later. So you cannot stop. If there's something you want to do, maybe today you only go so far. Maybe tomorrow it will be a little farther, but you have to keep working at it. As far as doing things, a lot of us have become very creative in the way we think about it. I know when I first left there and came back home, I was having problems with walking. My balance was terrible. I didn't have the strength in my legs that I needed. And before I had the stroke, I was very involved with doing line dancing. And I still loved the idea of doing that. So my sister-in-law once a week would go over to this place to go line dancing. And at first, all I could do was sit in a chair and move my feet to the different steps. And as I got stronger, I would get up and stand towards the back of the room because I didn't want to be a distraction. And I would try a few steps. And every week I got a little better at it. And pretty soon the teacher found out who I was and what I was doing and why. And she would come over and put her arm around my waist. And that gave me so much confidence and so much strength that I was able to complete a dance. So use your mind and think creatively as to what you can do to help yourself. If you're having problems moving your hands and you like to bake, there's a lot of movement in kneading bread. And you also get something very good to eat at the end of it. So just think about that. But we've mentioned living in the assisted living. There was something that happened there that I'd like to share with your audience that really was a turning point for me. There was one night, she was the midnight nurse, and she came into my room, and I was really struggling that night. I was just having a difficult time trying to put all the pieces together and understand what did the future hold. And so we got into this long conversation about me, about the situation and stuff. And she said, you know what? She said, about 4 years ago, I was in a really, really horrible car accident where I went through the windshield. But before I went all the way through it, the front of my head clipped the rear view mirror, and it took a big chunk out of the front of my forehead. And I asked her if I could touch it. And it reminded me of a baby, how they've got that little soft spot that you can feel the pulse. It was the same thing with her head. And I asked her, I said, did it help you being a nurse to understand what was happening and what was going on? And she looked at me and she said, I didn't become a nurse until afterwards. And that was the first time that it dawned on me that there is a life after, not just an existence, but a life. And that's what your search should be as you're on this journey, is looking for what your life will become.
Tell us about how you got into writing, and tell us about the books that you have come out and any upcoming books.
I started writing when I was very young. I never had confidence in anything I wrote, but I spent a great deal of time in writing. I wrote commercials. I worked at a radio station. That was my first job. I worked at a radio station as a disc jockey. It was an all-girl jazz station in Chicago back in the 60s. And we were one of the stations that was instrumental in opening the doors for other women to be a part of the broadcasting community. And I'm very proud to say that I was a part of that. As far as the books go, the first book I wrote is called you believe I see the cover and I just went blank on the title. Begotten with Love. And that was written for my grandfather. It was a biography basically of his life. And it went through everything that an immigrant family faced when they came to America. And some of the foibles and the challenges and the funny stuff that happened, and some of the sad things as well. I found, because I lost my family when I was at such a young age, I wanted to make sure that my own children and grandchildren understood who their family was before I left this earth. And so I was very happy to be able to write that one. And I've heard from a lot of people that it really inspired them to write about their families too, and that makes me really happy. The second book is called Trapped Within, and that has to do everything with the stroke, because I really felt that a lot of people needed to know that they were not alone. And I found for myself, when I read through the book, I realized that from the beginning all the way to the end, I followed the steps of grieving. It's a long process, but now I feel, even though I still have residual, my throat is weakened. I do have some signs of aphasia still, and my balance is horrible. But other than that, I'm fine, and I'm grateful for life. I'm grateful for the people around me, and I'm grateful for an opportunity to share my story with so many others.
Give us some contact information. Tell us how we can purchase your books, if you have a website or any social media links.
It's obviously on Amazon. We also have a website, so if you want to buy a copy directly from me, you can do that as well. The website is www.joann.joannglim.com. And that will tell you not only about the books, but it will tell you about the podcast that we do weekly called Don't Count Me Out. We're on Facebook. The group page is the Facebook groups /D is in David, C is in Cat, M is in Mary, and O. DCMO, which is short for Don't Count Me Out, .talks. And you'll find us, we got a great group of people that meet, and we would love to have any of your listeners come and join us.
Well, before we go, tell us about that Don't Count Me Out podcast and give us some final thoughts to close it out.
Oh my goodness. That started because of the book. The book was the inspiration for the podcast. And we are only one of a number of groups that are on there. And each one of us seems to have found a certain area. We intersect with everybody as far as what we're doing. We're all stroke survivors or their families, or we have a lot of medical professionals that join us as well. So anyone has any interest in knowing more about stroke and how you can help, come and join us, and you'll find other people as well that have the same interest.
Ladies and gentlemen, joanneglim.com. Please be sure to follow, rate, review, and share after listening to this episode. Jo Ann, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.